Hey, Emil Kadlec here with the Football Die Hard Sunday DFS show. Week 11 of the NFL season. We're here with the popular and talented Jason Brady and, of course, myself, Emil Kadlec, the fantasy football old man, or should I say the old man of fantasy. Brady, how's it going today?
It's going pretty good. I'm actually really looking forward to this slate today on Sunday. It seems like it's going to be kind of a challenging one. We really have to dig for some good plays. Like we mentioned backstage, like a lot of the good plays that we're used to played on that Thursday night game. So with the Kyler Murray and all of them. So still some good plays to talk about here, and really looking forward to it. Had a pretty solid week last week. Got kind of bailed out by the DeAndre Hopkins Hail Mary, but I mean, I'll take it all day.
Really, that's hilarious. Well,
It's
beautiful.
awesome.
Well,
I couldn't
let's
believe
see.
it.
Yeah, wasn't that a perfect pass?
Yes.
And of course, a perfect catch. I mean, everybody was around him, but he got his hands up just right there. It was beautiful. Of course, I'm not sure who I was really rooting for, but that's the problem sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, you want to
I
start
feel
with
it.
the quarterbacks?
Yeah, we'll start with the quarterbacks, and we have a really interesting situation with the quarterbacks this week. Obviously, we'll get to him in a second, but Taysom Hill at 4,800, it definitely opens up a lot of things. But I think I'm going to pay down at quarterback this week. I do want to pay up at running back. The quarterbacks up top are like Lamar Jackson, Aaron Rodgers, not too interested in them. Matt Ryan, 6,300 versus the Saints here in a 50.5-point game total. Somebody I'm looking at where the Falcons are 5-point underdogs, which I do like for him there. So they should be coming from behind, leading to more passing attempts for Matt Ryan. And what I like about Matt Ryan is he brings tons of volume each week, averaging 39 passing attempts per week. I remember last year he's averaging like close to 50 passing attempts per week, but now it's came down a little bit, but still he's throwing a lot. Solid stackable options. Calvin Ridley, someone that came back this week. Julio Jones has been on a tear as of late. So touchdown upside in what should be a high-scoring game here for Matt Ryan. I believe it's either the first or second best total on the slate. So, yeah, Matt Ryan, I do think if you want to get a little bit different from the Taysom Hill chalk, you could go on the other side of the ball and play Matt Ryan here for some upside. I'm not too sure. We'll talk about it, but I'm not too sure how good Taysom Hill will do today. So,
Yes, Matt Ryan, 4.6% owned. So he's not that
it's not bad.
he's not that highly owned.
Yeah, definitely going to be lower owned than the Taysom Hill side. And I actually do think there's some decent upside. Just him throwing the ball a ton.
Yeah, do you worry at all about being at New Orleans? You worried about that New Orleans defense at all?
Yeah, they do have a solid defense, but when you're throwing the ball 40 times, you have a decent floor there. And I actually think the price is like 6,300. That's pretty cheap.
That's pretty cheap. And you got Taysom Hill. You'll talk about him later. You know, he's never started a game, so there's a chance that the offense may not be as efficient as they usually are and maybe don't get as many first downs. Hence, they're going to give the ball back to Atlanta. Atlanta may actually get a few more opportunities given this situation. Perhaps.
Could be. I don't know. We'll have to see. It's going to be
We'll
exciting.
see.
All right, getting into the next play here. And we have Cam Newton, 6,200 versus Houston in a 48-point game total where the Patriots are 2-point favorites. And Newton is averaging 20.1 DraftKings points per week this year, which kind of surprised me because it seems like he's been doing really bad as of late. He did have a kind of a bounce-back game last week, though. And I really love the matchup here against this Houston defense. You got decent stacking options with Myers, someone we'll talk about, and Bird. And I guess it's more of a cash game play here for me, but I don't mind the tournament upside as well, especially with the rushing yard upside he has. He has rushing touchdown upside as well, which you'd like to see on a fantasy sports play there. 7 rushing touchdowns on the year for Newton there. So, yeah, 6,200. It's not a bad play. I really like the matchup. I really like the price. I might go to him and some lamps here today.
Yeah, add Houston. I can't believe he's had 7 rushing touchdowns this year. It's definitely helping his numbers. 5.8% owned. So, he's that's reasonable. But, yeah, not a bad number right there. Yeah. Good opportunity at Houston. And New England's making us push. They didn't look good. It was like 3-5 or something. It looked horrible. They creeped out a couple victories, and all of a sudden they're in a possibility. That Belichick seems to always find a way, but that's not a bad play there today with Cam Newton.
Yep. Not bad. So this was probably the punt play I was going to go to in cash before the Taysom Hill opened up. But Joe Burrow, 5,500 versus Washington in a 46.5-point game total. where the Bengals are 1.5-point underdogs. And Burrow's actually averaging 20.6 DraftKings points per week, so averaging more than Cam Newton there. Tons of volume for Burrow each week. 370 passing attempts this year, averaging 41 passing attempts, averaging more than Matt Ryan this year in volume. So he throws the ball a lot. And he's had only 2 games under 17 DraftKings points against 2 really good defenses in Pittsburgh and Baltimore. So I actually kind of like this play at 5,500. I think the price is way off here. I don't mind the matchup against Washington. So, yeah, Burrow's somebody I'm looking at. I'm guessing he's going to be really low owned too.
He's the 5th owned quarterback at 7.9%. So 5th owned, 7.9 is not horrible. What do you think about that?
I thought I was going to be a little bit sneaky with that play, but I guess people are catching on there.
Yeah, he's an interesting, rookie quarterback who's kind of unique. He's done some things that not many rookie quarterbacks do, so I think maybe that's the sneaky play. Washington's got a decent defense, maybe more against the run. I haven't really looked the exact numbers up for the last couple of weeks, but maybe that's why they think he'll pass well, because they have a good defense against the run.
Yeah, they do have a pretty solid run defense, but yeah, still a decent play. That's just way too cheap. I think that's why it's gaining some ownership.
You're probably right. 5,500 does sound kind of cheap to me.
Yeah. All right, I do want to talk about one more play. Actually, I like Deshaun Watson as well, 6,500 against New England, but this is the last play I do want to talk about, and that is Taysom Hill, 4,800 versus Atlanta, and a 50.5-point game total, which is one of the highest on the slate, and the Saints are 5-point favorites. So I think it's tough. I mean, I do think you have to kind of play this in cash. You get a really nice floor. The price is really cheap. But I think for tournaments, you can definitely go elsewhere and get different, because I do think he's going to gain a lot of ownership. So Breeze is out, giving Hill a big opportunity here against a really bad Atlanta passing defense, Atlanta defense in general. You got to do some stacking options, Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas. I don't know if I'd stack him with Michael Thomas, so I don't know. It's really hard to see, really hard to know how good Taysom Hill is going to do. I was actually kind of shocked that they went with Taysom Hill over Jameis Winston, a guy that's actually been proven to be somewhat decent. So I don't know. It's a really weird situation here for the Saints. But I do think he has some solid matchup just with the matchup alone, with the price at 4,800. And at that price, you really don't need much. So I guess that's why I'm intrigued here. But in tournaments, I might try to get a little bit different. But this is probably a play you want to go for in cash.
Yeah, Taysom Hill is the number 1 owned quarterback in DraftKings at 11.3%, way up there. Well, he's the number 1 owned quarterback. So, again, this is an interesting scenario where people get so emotionally attached to a change. This guy's never started a game in the NFL, and he's the number 1 owned quarterback with unknowns. I mean, they may bring in Winston occasionally in the game. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that they've said that, but that's not that's not an unknown. That's a possibility. But yeah, that's kind of high owned. I think that people, remember when Le'Veon Bell came to the Kansas City Chiefs? The nuts. Mm-hmm. People were nuts, and what happened? He didn't do much. Did little than much. Yep. So I think maybe people are overrating him. We'll go back to tight ends in a little bit. I just wanted to mention, if people don't hear that about tight ends, he is the number 1 ranked tight end in FanDuel at 64%. So obviously, if you can pay him at tight end and he scores 14, 15 points, which may not be that great for a quarterback, that's pretty good for a tight end, and of course the salary. Yeah. And we can talk about that later. But yeah, what a weird week for a player like Taysom Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say it's risky, but he's 4,800. But yeah, you mentioned it; they could very well bring in Jameis Winston, and Winston could play a lot of that game. So yeah, it's not something I want to go too heavy on. Honestly, it's sketchy
Gotcha.
For real. All right,
was
there any other quarterback? Other quarterback you wanted to throw out?
I was kind of. It's scary. I know this is going to be scary when I say this, but Alex Smith.
Ooh, Alex Smith.
He's 5,300. He's been throwing over 300 yards a game. I think he got 400 and something last week. They may be, it's Cincinnati's DFS. Now, he looked pretty bad when he came in due to injury like 3 weeks ago, but he had no prep. And matter of fact, way before that, he was even the third quarterback. So he hasn't been getting a lot of, reps with the first team. So now he's gotten two games in a row. He's gotten some time to get adjusted. If he could get the touchdown, if he can get a touchdown or two, 5,300, and he's owned at 3.1%, he may be a GPP play. Is that insane, Bryson? Jason?
It's not too insane. Only one touchdown in 3 games so far. He's thrown over 100 passing attempts. I like the volume he threw last game, 55 passing attempts. He threw the ball like 15 times to McKissick, Mclaren. He throws the ball to him a ton. I actually don't mind it, but if he can score a touchdown, that's the big thing there. He hasn't really done that as of late, but when you're throwing the ball 55 times, you're going to have opportunities, and the match is really good. So, yeah, decent play there, and I do like the low ownership as well. But 3 interceptions so far, 1 touchdown. If you can find the end zone a couple times,
well,
I think he can definitely go off.
Yeah, it's certainly a contrarian scenario there. He knows how to play the game. He's never been a great player, but you are playing against Cincinnati's defense, and you could stack him. Terry is definitely, he's a guy who really commands a lot of opportunity, and he's kind of defense independent, or whatever the word is. I'm a little tired tonight, or this morning, so I'm making a mistake. And McKisson is another curious. I'm just bringing it up as a potential contrarian thing. They're going to throw the ball a lot. They could throw the ball a lot, like he has the last 2 weeks. And against Cincinnati, they're at home. It's worth talking about. But anyway, enough said.
For sure,
perhaps.
I don't mind it. Because in the past two games, if he would have scored some touchdowns, he would have done it right. So if you can find the end zone, good play there.
Sounds good.
All right. So moving on to the running backs, and for running backs this week, since I'm paying down a quarterback, I'm going to be paying down at tight end. There's a bunch of cheap tight ends we'll talk about. I'm going to be paying up at running back, and up top, you got Alvin Kamara, 9,200 versus Atlanta, and a 15.5-point game total, where the Saints are 5-point favorites. Kamara is averaging 27.7 DraftKings points per week. And I really like Kamara in cash share. I like him in tournaments as well. Drew Brees is out, and I feel like they're going to lean on Kamara a little bit more here. The only concern is Taysom Hill, a quarterback. Is he going to be able to check down to Taysom Hill like Drew Brees does? And I really hope so. It's not hard to check the ball down there, but fantastic floor and a great ceiling for Kamara as always. And I really like the matchup here against this Atlanta defense. Really bad passing defense, not so great run defense as well. And he's good for around 20 touches and has some touchdown upside in which should be a high-scoring game here. So Kamara is probably where I'm going to go to in cash this week.
He's the most owned running back, 11.8%. Atlanta, obviously been doing good. You would assume that Taysom Hill can check down to Kamara. Michael Thomas just still isn't Michael Thomas right now. I don't know if it's going to change. I kind of tried that last week. I threw Michael Thomas into a few lineups and didn't work. And maybe he's not ready now with a new quarterback. The unknown of a new quarterback coming in, is all of a sudden Michael Thomas going to become Michael Thomas? And if not, Alvin Kamara. You would think you could check down to Alvin Kamara. That's one of the easier throws, you would think, like he's a tight end almost. So, yeah, that's a nice cash play. I agree.
Yeah, I like it there. So getting to the next play here, Dalvin Cook, 9,000 versus Dallas. I'm guessing he's either number 1 or number 2 owned for this week. And, I'm going here in cash as well. My strategy is going to be go up there and get those 2 best running back plays on the slate, Kamara and Cook, pay down at other positions. And hopefully it's a little bit contrarian. I don't know if many people are going to do that. But I really like Dalvin Cook here going against Dallas in a 40.5 point game total. Which is, I believe, one of the highest on the slate here. And the Vikings are 7-point favorites, which I do like that for Cook. And Cook is averaging 28.7 DraftKings points per week, and he's been on an absolute tear as of late, scoring over 100 total DraftKings points in the last 3 weeks combined. 34 touches last week. He's always good for that, around that 30-touch mark, especially here when they should have a lead. They should be pounding the ball with Cook for most of the time. And really high touchdown upside, 13 touchdowns on the year. And, should get a lot of carries. I like the matchup, and I do like this as a cash play. And I think there's tournament upside as well. As we've seen in the past couple of weeks, he can absolutely go off.
33.9% owned. He's the number 1 owned running back, which makes sense, 33%. So it's a chalky situation, but like you said, you may want to even play him in GPP because he's done so well, and it's against the Dallas Cowboys at home.
Exactly.
But it's the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, maybe Dallas's defense is getting a little bit better, but wow, Dalvin Cook is just on a roll. He's incredible. He's playing great. He's doing really well. I like that too. I wonder what we can build with a Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara spending that much salary. I'm going to try that out when we get off the phone here with our tool here on Football Diehards and a few of my other quirky picks, like maybe an Alex Smith, an insane pick. But yeah, that's going to be fun watching that today, unless you're a Dallas Cowboy fan.
I know. I mean, Cook should have a decent game. Everything's lining up for him today, so hopefully he gets it done.
I don't want to bet against him, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. So getting to the next play here, we have Miles Sanders, 6,900 versus Cleveland in a 47-point game total, where the Eagles are 3-point underdogs. And Sanders is averaging 16.3 DraftKings points. Came back from an injury last week, did pretty well, has 17 touches and 5 targets. Also, I think he had 2 or 3 receptions. So he does have that pass catching upside with some decent volume as a whole there. Not too bad of a matchup here against Cleveland, and Cleveland is also missing Myles Garrett, and I think that's going to be really big for this game as well. Their best defensive player, obviously. So, yeah, Sanders 6,100. I think he has some decent pass catching upside. I like the price. The matchup's not bad. He had 2 touchdowns stolen from him last week from the backup running back. So, if that didn't happen last week, it would have had a pretty solid game. So, yeah, I like the price there.
Yeah, they got to start putting him in at the goal line, or he's got to start running him in from the 10-yard line or whatnot. Yeah. At Cleveland, I assume there's no real weather there, although it's just probably somewhat, I don't know what the weather is. Nonetheless, I think that's a good play. He's a 6.2% owned for what that's worth. So, interesting
Seems
play,
low.
6,900. Yeah, 6.2% owned.
Yeah. All right, so getting to this next play, I'm kind of curious to hear the ownership on this one because this guy, he basically screwed everybody last week, and that is Mike Davis, 6,800 versus Detroit. So Detroit has given up the most DraftKings points this year to running backs, which is really interesting. And he's been awful as of late, scoring like 8 DraftKings points in the last 4 weeks he's played. And he had a 2,800 salary price jump here for Mike Davis. If we remember last week, he was 4,000 minimum price. DraftKings made a really big mistake, but did they? Because he did not have a great game, only scoring 8 points, not really doing much. You didn't need much at 4,000, but still you would have liked him to do more than 8 points there. So I do think that'll lower the ownership a ton for Mike Davis here. And the matchup's really good. Could he bounce back? I mean, you'd hope so against Detroit here. And you really can't ask for a better matchup. So what's the ownership on Davis? I'm really intrigued to hear. If it's really low, I'll be interested. If there's high ownership, I'm probably going to stay away, honestly.
He's the number 3 owned running back, 14.4% owned.
Wow.
Can
Yeah,
you believe
I
that?
mean, no, I actually can't. I guess people, man, I thought I was
Maybe
going
it's
to be
Detroit.
sneaky with that one.
Detroit doesn't seem to be the greatest defense in the world. Yeah, that's really high. And do you remember last week I talked about that you may not want to, be so all in on Mike Davis?
Yeah.
I only put him in one of my 5 lineups.
Well, that was a big advantage because he was heavy owned.
He had every reason. There was no reason to start Mike Davis last week, and that's why sometimes I get scared. It's that Madison Cook scenario that happened earlier in the year when there was no reason to start to not start Madison or whatever. Sometimes it just doesn't happen the way you think it's going to happen, but evidently it's still an opportunity this week, and everybody's on to him. The number 3 owned running back. That's pretty high.
It's definitely surprising because he has done nothing like the last 4 or 5 weeks. So could he bounce back here? I mean, yeah, it's a good matchup, but that ownership does kind of scare me away a little bit, honestly.
Gotcha.
All right, next play here, and curious to hear the ownership for this one. That is Giovanni Bernard, 5,500 versus Washington, so Joe Mixon is out. And in this game, there's a 47-point game total where the Bengals are 1.5-point underdogs. So he scored 20.6 and 22.8 the first 2 games that Mixon was out, so you know he has that decent upside. And he scored 8 points last week, but it was against a really tough Pittsburgh defense, so I'm not looking into that all that much. Definitely an easier matchup here against Washington. Bernard has some pass-catching upside, 12 receptions in his last 3 games, so that's something I like about him. He's really cheap here, 5,500. I do think he can definitely pay that off, and I think there's some solid upside.
Yeah, interesting guy, 7.7% owned. And obviously he's been playing a while with Mixon out, and Mixon went out earlier in the week. So, that's a pretty solid ownership. I don't think it's going to move a lot is what I'm trying to say, because people have known that Mixon's been out. He's produced well. Yeah. It's against Washington, at Washington, who's a better defense against the run, although Giovanni is a multi-threat, can catch the ball. So, yeah, that's a nice play. I don't know, 7.7. What do you think about that ownership?
It's not awful. It's better than that Mike Davis ownership, I'll tell you that.
Yes.
All right, so we'll get into the next play here, and this is the last play I do want to talk about. And that is Duke Johnson, 5,400 versus New England in a 48-point game total where the Texans are 2-point underdogs. So David Johnson was placed on injury reserve. I think he's going to miss a couple weeks there. So Duke disappointed a lot of people as well last week. He was really, really cheap last week, I think at 5,000, really high owned. And he only scored 5.4 DraftKings points. He had 14 rushing attempts and 0 receptions, and that was the first game all year where he had 0 receptions. And it's pretty crazy because David Johnson was not playing. But we talked about it last week. There's some really bad weather in Cleveland, so I don't want to look into that all that much. And I do think he will bounce back here against New England. I know it's not the best matchup in the world, but he had some really bad weather to deal with last week.
Yeah, let's hope it was the weather. Actually, believe it or not, again, here we go. He's the Duke Johnson's the number 2 owned running back at 15.4%. So I guess people are going your way there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. But yeah, man,
that's huge.
Yeah, he is a good. Yeah, that is big.
I think he's going to get the opportunities, just like you said, and he should. He's a receiving running back. He's supposed to get targets there. New England's a scary team because they like to lock down the best player on your team. I don't think Duke Johnson's the best player on Houston's team, so maybe he'll get some opportunities this week. That's a high ownership.
Good point.
High ownership.
Yep, good point. They'll probably try to lock down Fuller or Cook. So Cook, definitely makes sense.
Try to lock down the passing.
All right.
game.
Was there any other running back you wanted to touch on? I think Kalen Ballage is interesting, but other than that, there's not really anybody.
Yeah, just quickly, Ballage is 11%. He's a high-owned, that's a fairly high-owned. He's the 6th most-owned running back. The thing about they're playing at the Jets, and Ballage, if he gets what he's supposed to get, he's catching the ball. He had 6 targets, 5 catches for, I think it was 34 yards. And when you get a guy, when you get running backs that can catch and receive, it raises that floor up a little bit. So he's an interesting guy. But the other guy I'm interested in is Henry. Let me find him here. I mean, he didn't have a good week last week. He is 4% owned at Baltimore, but Baltimore is missing 2 of their key defensive players this week. And if I recall, the team that played against Baltimore last week ran the ball real well. I should have that on my little cheat sheet, and I don't have it. So Henry's kind of got a potential there, maybe in GPP with that 4% ownership. Well, what do you think?
I definitely like that, and I like that you mentioned that there's 2 defensive players missing for Baltimore, so definitely could be sneaky. You're getting off of the Kamara chalk, you're getting off of the Cook chalk, and Derrick Henry, I mean, he's somebody that has that upside, and I'm not overly high on the Baltimore team as a whole. The only thing I'd be concerned about for Henry, and this is what we always have to worry about, is if the Titans do go behind in a game, that's when they do abandon the running game a little bit, but if they're able to get out ahead, which I'm not overly concerned about this Ravens offense that's been awful this year, Derrick Henry could definitely do good. He has easily 20-plus carry upside. The only thing about Henry is he does not catch the ball, and that's what's not great for DFS. But he definitely has 100-yard rushing upside. He definitely has multiple touchdown upside. So yeah, at 4% owned for a guy like Derrick Henry, it's I think it could be a decent tournament play.
And last week, the Ravens played at New England, and Damian Harris had 22 carries for 121 yards, 5.5. Rex Burkhardt got it 6 carries for 31. Newton ran the ball a little bit. So they had they had 170 yards against Baltimore on the ground. So that's a significant thing. Now, they pretty much, basically the Patriots, went to a running game. Newton had only had 17 attempts for 118 yards, and of course Jacoby Myers had 1 attempt for a touchdown to Burkhardt near the goal line, 24 yards. So, yeah, I think seriously should consider Henry at 4% owned. Like you said, I'd never like playing at Baltimore. I hate playing at Baltimore, but they are down in the defense. And, so it's too bad Henry doesn't catch a few balls. But like you said, he can go. His ceiling as a running back is very high.
Yes. I don't think he's scored in the last 2 weeks, but yeah, he's definitely due for a couple touchdowns here. So yeah, I think Henry's very, very interesting. So good play there for sure.
That's the only one. Well, actually, Nahim Heinz is another interesting guy at 5.8%. But he's kind of, that's a three-headed monster there in Indianapolis. But if the other thing that Bob Harris interviewed somebody from Indianapolis who said that Heinz is definitely the back that's in the backfield when they're doing their no huddle. And if they get into a scoring contest with Green Bay, Heinz could get a lot more opportunities in their no huddle offense since he's the guy who's in the game at the running back position. So another thing to think about. 5.8% owned, $5,200 for Heinz.
Yep, not bad there. The only thing I'm back. All right,
Pardon?
Sounds good to me. So yeah. Yep, you threw out a really good Derrick Henry play. I'm definitely going to have to look into that a little bit more. And yeah, I think it could be very, very interesting getting off of some of that Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook chalk.
Interesting. Save a little money on a couple of the lineups.
Yep, there
I
you
assume
go.
it's a little,
right.
8,000. You're going to save a lot if you're going to switch off from one of those guys. That's $1,000 roughly.
All right, so getting into the wide receivers here. Obviously, up top, you had Devante Adams. He's in play every single week. It's been fantastic. I really like Julio Jones this week, but Keenan Allen, 7,400 going against the Jets in a 46.5-point game total where the Chargers are 9.5 favorites. And Allen's averaging 19.1 DraftKings points per week. He's averaging a little bit over 10 targets per game. That's what I like about Allen, especially from a cash game perspective. I do think he has some tournament upside as well as he gets a ton of targets. He did get hurt early on in one of the games earlier in the year, so that's kind of skewed. He should be averaging 12 targets. He gets a ton of targets each week. I like the matchup here against the Jets. And should do decent here against the Jets here.
Keenan Allen, the number one owned wide receiver at 19.3%. So, what do you expect? It's at the Jets. He's playing well. Yeah, he's going to be highly owned. He's a chalker right there. There's nothing you can get around it. But, yeah, excellent play right there.
Yeah, he's had himself a year, so for sure can understand the ownership. What's Devante Adams' ownership? I'm kind of curious to hear how owned he is this week because it seems like he's been getting some ownership as of late.
Yeah, he's number 2 at 17.3, so he's just behind Keenan Allen in ownership.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, getting to the next play here, we have Terry McLaurin. All right, Terry McLaurin, 6,900 versus Cincinnati in a 46.5-point game total where Washington is a 1.5-point favorite. And McLaurin's averaging 18.3 DraftKings points per game. He's another guy that gets a lot of volume each week, 9.5 targets per game. Of course, he has Alex Smith throwing to him, so doesn't have the best quarterback throwing to him, but still has been doing pretty solid all year, really. So really good matchup here against Cincinnati. Nice cash game play, I'd say, with some tournament upside as well, especially if you can find the end zone. He's doing really well with not really scoring much all year. So if he can definitely find the end zone, I think he'll be good. Only 3 touchdowns on the year. So, 6,900 is pretty intriguing to me.
Yeah, fourth owned wide receiver, 16.5%. I don't recall what his ownership was the last couple of weeks, but that's pretty high. But he's kind of the guy there. Like he's getting most of the targets at wide receiver in the passing game, and the running back you mentioned earlier. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe
because-
he would fit in a contrarian stack with Alex, like we talked before. But just mention it.
Yep, definitely could go that way for sure.
6,900 salary. Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, so getting to the next play here, and we have Deontay Johnson, 5,900 versus Jacksonville, and a 46.5-point game total where the Steelers are 10.5 favorites. And Johnson's averaging 13.4 DraftKings points per game, but as we know, that's a little bit skewed because he gets hurt in like every game he plays, except for late. He hasn't been hurt in like 2 weeks, so props to him. Hopefully he can keep it up. And I really do like the matchup here against Jacksonville, and I think he's way too cheap here at 5,800. He's going to be cheaper than Juju Smith. He's going to be cheaper than Claypool, and I actually think that he has the most upside out of both of those guys. So pretty intriguing there. 21 targets in the last 2 weeks. Has that 10-target upside. I remember he had like 15 targets a couple weeks ago as well. And the Steelers throw the ball a lot, so I do think he'll get a lot of opportunities. I know there's a lot of competition there with Claypool and Juju, but he's still going to get a lot of opportunity at 5,100. I think it's worth a shot there against Jacksonville.
Deontay Johnson, fourth most owned wide receiver, 16.9%. So he's right below the big guys.
Understandable.
Of course, you're playing at Jacksonville too, so I can see the interest.
Yeah, that's definitely why. All right, so getting to the next play here, and actually kind of curious to hear the ownership of Marvin Jones Jr., 5,500 versus Carolina, and a 46.5-point game total where the Lions are 2-point favorites. And Jones is averaging 11.5 DraftKings points, and he scored at least 10 points in his last 4 games. And he should get a lot of opportunities here with Kenny Golladay and Danny Amendola out, which I think is huge for him here. And a decent matchup against this Carolina defense. I know that Carolina's run defense is one of the worst in the league. Their passing defense is not something I'm overly concerned about. So, yeah, 5,500. I'm curious to hear the ownership. What is it?
4.9% owned.
Awesome. There we go.
That's fairly low. And, those guys have been out for a couple of days, so it's not like this is new news on Sunday morning that Amendola and Golladay are out. So, yeah, that's a good ownership. I don't know, he'll probably get covered fairly well because you got that other Marvin Hall, who may sneak him there. I keep talking about him. I apologize, but he may get some opportunity with Marvin being covered a lot, perhaps. And Marvin Hall is at 2.9% owned, $3,800 salary. So, yeah, I like Jones. I think Marvin Jones Jr., that's a great play. Save some money
and you talked about
Pardon?
You talked about him. Marvin Hall is somebody else I was going to talk about too. 3,800. So yeah, like you mentioned. No, you're good. Good call there. Like they're going to be focusing on Jones for sure. So that's going to leave a lot of opportunities open for Marvin Hall. And even then, like Hall had a pretty solid game last week. I think he scored like around 15 DraftKings points. So yeah, I think with Golladay out, I think with Amendola out, I think that's huge for Marvin Hall. And I think at 3,800. You said like 2% ownership. Yeah, I think that's a really good play there as well.
At 2.9%, that's fairly low.
Those
are going to be tough ones. I'm mentally trying to put together a couple lineups right now that I may have to stick them in. If I'm going to go heavy at some of those running backs, I need to find some savings there, and Hall may be one of those guys.
Yeah, I like it. All right, so Brandon Cooks, 5,200 versus the Patriots in a 48-point game total where the Texans are 2-point underdogs. And he played in really bad weather last week in Cleveland, we mentioned on the show, and he scored only 9 DraftKings points. And it's not the best matchup in the world here against New England, but I'm not overly concerned. Cooks has been getting a lot of targets as of late. You get a $1,000 savings off of Will Fuller, and Cooks has actually been getting more targets than Fuller. Pretty much all year. He has I think 5 to 10 more targets than Will Fuller all season. So, yeah, way too cheap here for the amount of volume that he gets. 5,200 I think is kind of really cheap there. So I'm curious to hear the ownership. I think it's a good stackable option with Deshaun Watson. But Yeah, I like Brandon Cooks here at 5,200.
Sixth most owned wide receiver, 14.3%. So people are recognizing that situation, even though they're playing New England. But $5,200 is a pretty darn good value there, as you said. So, but he's a chalky player.
He is. I don't understand that price, but yeah, I think
that is bizarre
play.
to me. I'm not sure what that's coming at.
Yeah, another price I'm kind of Jacoby Myers, 4,900. I also think that's way too cheap going against Houston. On the other side of the ball of Cooks, a 48-point game total where the Patriots are 2-point favorites. And, Myers is Cam Newton's favorite target. He's been fantastic the last 4 games, scoring 15, 31, 13, and 10. So still no Julian Edelman, and Harry came back, but he has not been doing anything at all. So I think Myers is that guy in New England that's going to be catching these passes. And, he seems way too cheap here at 4,900. I really don't get it. And I do think there's some solid upside and also a really good matchup as well against this Houston defense that is not great at all. So, 4,900. I'm curious to the ownership.
God, $4,900. He's 17% owned. He's the third most owned wide receiver, but God, he's hard not to play this week in some of your lineups. I was worried Neil Harris was going to come in and take back over or cut into Jacoby's targets. It didn't happen last week. I don't even think he got a target. He didn't get a catch. That is Harry. So is that going to change? Was he out of shape? Are they going to put him back in? I wouldn't worry about it. I think right now Myers is, like you said, he's the guy, and I don't think Harry's going to put much of a dent in the touches or targets that Jacoby Myers is going to get. I just think is Jacoby going to make the end zone? I don't think Jacoby's been making the end zone. That's the issue. But he's getting enough targets. I'm not sure if it's going to matter. Let's see where we're at. He had 7 targets for 5 catches, 59 yards last week, and ironically, Burkhardt caught the 2 touchdowns. That's not always going to happen. So Meyer is due for a touchdown, and I'm sure that would make him very worthy of a salary of $4,900.
Big time for sure.
All
right. So before we get into the last play, I do want to touch on. I think that the Vikings receivers are really interesting here. Adam Thielen at 6,300. And Justin Jefferson at 6,000, just because Dalvin Cook's going to be very, very chalky this week. So I think that's going to lower the ownership of the Vikings receivers. And we got to remember how bad the Dallas passing defense is. So I think if you want to get different, maybe go and attack that Vikings passing game rather than going to Dalvin Cook in some tournaments. Preferably, I'd probably go with the Justin Jefferson side because you are saving some salary off of Thielen. But Thielen's a fantastic play as well. And also, I think Thielen at 6,300 and Jefferson at 6,000. I think they're both way too cheap. So I'll definitely be putting them in my lineups there to get off of that Cook chalk there. Do you know the ownership of these guys?
Sorry, I turned my mic off to cough. Justin Jefferson, 11.7. Just behind him, Adam Thielen, 11.3. So they're fairly well owned. They're not the top owned. They've been splitting things up a bit. I like that play. It's an interesting play as to fade Cook and pick one of these guys. They're a difficult way to pick. I mean, Thielen got the touchdowns last week and Jefferson got the yardage. Against Cowboys, I kind of like playing Justin Jefferson. He's $300 cheaper, but I don't know, that's Nick Knox. He's just got so much potential each game. He's shown that his ceiling is incredible. And a Dallas defense, I think that's a situation where he could benefit the most. I could be wrong, but I kind of like a Justin Jefferson play here. I like that.
Yeah, I like it too. Definitely something I'm going to be looking at for sure. All right, and then the last play I do want to touch on, another pump play, and I don't know if you had to go down here because I think Marvin Hall is a really good play. I think Mims at 3,300 is another solid pump play, but Jakeem Grant, 3,500 versus Denver, and went with this play last week. It worked out really well. 45-point game total here where the Dolphins are 3.5-point favorites. And he did have 14.3 DraftKings points last week at 3,000 minimum price, which was awesome. They did price him up $500 here, but I still think he's a solid play. Filling in for that Preston Williams role, should see a decent amount of targets. Had 5 targets last week, found the end zone. So I think Grant's somebody you could go to, but I do like the Marvin Hall play a little bit more there.
Yeah, Grant was a good play. He did catch a touchdown, which kind of made those numbers, so I'm not sure if he's touchdown dependent or not. He's at basically 3% owned, so nicely low owned going into Denver this week. So yeah, that's definitely a good play. That did work well last week, and we talked about that last week.
Yeah, that was huge because like nobody had him last week, so that was big.
Good. Something went well last week. Just kidding.
Yeah,
It wasn't horrible,
good.
But
yeah.
Yes.
All right. Was there anybody else?
I did have T. Higgins. He's been noticed by people. He's basically 4.5% owned this week. It's $5,900. But again, it's at Washington. He's a guy. He's I don't have the numbers in front of it. He's definitely a guy that you could think about this week. Decent salary, $5,900, low owned, and he's been getting the opportunities. So I think he's a good guy to seriously consider. Let me go look last week. I don't have it in front of me now. I do. He was targeted 9 targets last week against Pittsburgh. He caught 7 balls for 115 yards and a touchdown against the Pittsburgh Steelers at Pittsburgh. So, Boyd's a great player. Giovanni's been going to get the ball, but T. Higgins could end up having a pretty darn good day and be definite pay for his salary of $5,900 this week at Washington.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, doing that against Pittsburgh, that's pretty impressive there. And he is averaging 16.5 DraftKings points per game. So he's been doing this pretty much all year, pretty consistent guy. And I do like that Joe Burrow and T. Higgins stack there. And like you mentioned, 4% ownership. That's actually kind of surprising to be pretty low there.
Considering what he against Pittsburgh, I think that's a low number. I don't think people trust him yet. So you may be able to take advantage of that.
I mean, it's hard to trust some Bengals, but yeah, they're going to throw the ball a lot. And T. Higgins is getting that volume.
Excellent. That's all I had. That was my one little sneaky play.
I like it. Your sneaky plays, I don't know what it is, but every time you say a sneaky play, it always goes off. So I'm going to have to start paying extra attention to them.
Well, I picked a couple. I mean, obviously, I don't pick as many as you. I'm not on the line. I'm coming here on the fringe. I'm the fringe guy. But we've caught a few very nice plays. We've had a great year. It's been a lot of fun. I've done well in my $5 one bet each a week. This last week I was only 2 out of 5, so I lost a little, but it wasn't bad. A few guys just didn't come through the way we thought they did. But interesting plays.
Yeah, I'm definitely having the best year of my life in daily fantasy sports. So hopefully keep it going to this week.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, touching on the tight ends, I have 4 plays I do want to talk about. The first one is T.J. Hawkinson, 46.5-point game total here, and the Lions are 2-point favorites going against Carolina. And, he is averaging 11.7 DraftKings points per game, getting around 6 targets per game. And the Lions are really beat up in the passing game, which could lead to more opportunities for Hawkinson. Like we mentioned, Amendola's out, and Galladay's out as well. And I do like the price of $4,200, and I think this play has some decent solid upside.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that too, because Swift, who caught 5 balls last week and a receiving touchdown, is not playing either. Now, Kerryon Johnson. I need to talk slower. He can catch the ball too. He didn't last week. So Hawkinson is a very attractive guy. 4,200. I don't know. Is that semi-high for a tight end? 5.3% owned this week. He's the 6th most owned tight end, which actually is lower than last week. I think he was a little lower last week. So, God, he could get a few more targets in this game. That could be a pretty interesting play at tight end. If you're not starting that other guy, that new guy. Yeah.
All right. Going to the next play here, and we have Austin Hooper, 3,900 against Philadelphia, and a 46.5-point game total where the Browns are 3-point favorites. Good matchup here for Hooper. Poor game last week, but again, that was in bad weather in Cleveland. Should be a little bit better here and should be able to bounce back. So Philadelphia is ranked dead last against the tight end. And yeah, seems a little bit too cheap here for Austin Hooper, 3,900.
Yeah, that is low. He's at 5.22%. He only got targeted twice last week, caught one, as you said, on his first game back from coming back from injury. Horrible weather. I think it's a great situation where he was able to get in the game and get some game reps coming back from injury. So he could be an interesting play this week at home against Philadelphia. Hope the weather's good. And as you said, Philly has had a tough time against tight ends. So 5.22%. That's not bad.
It's not bad. All right, and then this is probably the lowest I'll go for tight end, and that is Logan Thomas, 3,300 versus Cincinnati in a 46.5-point game total, where Washington is a 1.5 favorite. And Thomas is averaging 8.5 DraftKings points per week, and it's kind of weird because he has he's averaging close to 6 targets per week as well. So getting decent volume for his price. Had 6 targets last week and 66 yards. Just a cheap tight end play. I don't think you really have to go down here, but this is a decent salary savings option. 52 targets on the year, and just a good matchup against the Cincinnati defense. So Logan Thomas is somebody I'd use if I had to save some money, basically, but I think he's fine.
6.8%. He's the 4th most owned tight end this week. So people are putting him in there. That's it's way down from Mark Andrews is 20%, Goddard is 10%, and behind him then you have Hunter Henry and Logan, but virtually about 6, just below 7% owned. Yeah. Definitely a savings there at 3,300.
That's Mark Andrews is 20%. That's pretty interesting there.
Against Tennessee.
Don't necessarily.
He's had trouble.
Agree.
I mean, he's just Baltimore's offense hasn't done what everybody expected them to do.
Yeah. All right, I'll throw one more out there, and Dallas Goedert, 3,800. This is probably where I'm going to go personally in cash and a decent amount of lineups going against Cleveland. 47-point game total here, where the Eagles are 3-point underdogs. And Goddard's averaging 9.1 DraftKings points per game. And Zach Ertz is still out. And you get a fantastic matchup against Cleveland, who struggles really bad against the tight end. And I just think Goddard's way too cheap here at 3,800. He will be, carrying some ownership, but the Browns are ranked 27th against the tight end. I know they were really bad last year against the tight end, really bad this year, and they are missing Myles Garrett as well, which I think is going to be huge for that game in general. So, yeah, Goddard at 3,800 is somebody I really like.
That's not a bad play. He finally was able to produce last week. 6 targets, 4 catches, 33 yards. Hopefully he'll score this week and really push that salary benefit. 3,800 is pretty good. Like I just said, he's the second owned tight end this week, 10.3%. So people are onto him, which makes sense because he finally produced last week, coming back from injury, and he's got a great option here. And let's hope that the weather's good in Cleveland. I don't think it's horrible. So yeah, that is another good play.
Yep, not bad. Was there any other tight end you want to throw out?
Well, we got to talk about Taysom Hill, who in FanDuel could be played as a tight end. And obviously, if he's going to score 12 to 15 points at quarterback, he's going to be a pretty valuable tight end. 4,500 on FanDuel, 63% owned in lineups on FanDuel. So he's almost a wire in FanDuel because what? Well, I don't know. 4,500 that's a little high, isn't it, for a tight end?
For FanDuel, the pricing is a lot different, really. Yeah. So it's kind of low, I'd say.
That's still pretty low. You're right. So that's I think a lot of people are considering Taysom Hill as a lock in FanDuel for tight end. Whether that's really going to happen, but what rare situations to be playing a quarterback when you can play him at tight end. And ESPN leagues, you can do that. A lot of talk that ESPN next week's going to switch him out of tight end, which I'm sure the Twitter is going to go crazy when they do that. So definitely in FanDuel, Taysom Hill is a guy that you have to seriously consider starting in a lot of your lineups.
Yep, plug him in. It's probably a free square, honestly.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
All right, so we'll talk about defense a little bit. So defense is really tricky because there's really not many plays that stick out to me. And honestly, I'm probably just going to pay down at defense. I'm going to pay down at tight end. I'm going to pay down at quarterback. I want to pay up and get my running backs. I want to get my Kamaras, my Cooks, my Derrick Henrys. I think is going to be a good play that you mentioned there. So paying down at defense, there's really not much. I guess the Bengals are interesting. Going against Washington, I'm not overly high on the Washington offense as a whole. 2,300, you really don't need much. I think that's where I'm going to go to with my punt. Other than that, there's really not much. I was looking at the Browns defense at 3,000 until Myles Garrett was out. So, Washington football team at 2,900. Who's the highest owned defense?
Yeah, Pittsburgh Steelers, but they're not. They're the fifth most owned defense at 10%. Los Angeles Chargers against the Jets are the highest owned defense at $4,000, and the Miami Dolphins are the second at $3,400. Miami's this defense we just don't trust, and every Sunday morning you come out and you go, "Oh my God, they scored a touchdown on defense." They're a pretty good defense, and Drew Lock is probably going to play this week with rib injuries, and he has still prone to making mistakes. So perhaps Miami is an interesting play this week also.
Yeah, it seems like people are paying up for defense because there's really not much down there, which is fine. But I'm probably going to pay down to get the Bengals defense. But Steelers. If you can pay up for the Steelers, it's fantastic. The Chargers. If you can pay up for the Chargers, fantastic. But I'm mostly going to be paying down and punting. But if I was to pay up, I'd probably go with the Chargers or Steelers there.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Bengals. That would be funny if I played Alex Smith in one of my contrarian and then put the Cincinnati Bengals defense in. I'm kind of rooting against myself.
Yeah.
Probably not this.
So I don't know. Maybe the Bengals really don't need much at 2,300, like a couple interceptions, maybe a sack or two. I don't need much.
I guess you're still looking for that lucky defensive touchdown when you pick any of your defenses. It'd be really cool if they could pick one off and run it back, and they just get a little frosting on the cake for a cheap defense.
Yeah, that'd be nice. All right, but that's it for me.
That is it.
Is there anything you want to mention?
Yeah, we've had some very interesting ones. I got to figure out how to match some of these up. I don't have it all set up yet, but I think we got some very interesting ideas this week, and maybe we can sneak some more dollars out of DFS this week. We've done well. You've done really well this year.
That's been a crazy year, and we have a really crazy week this week. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think there's some nice low-owned plays, really good low-owned plays that we talked about that we can definitely target and hopefully make some money on this Sunday. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and the nice thing, as we've talked, is if you're going to go for some high-end players, and we've talked a lot about them in most of the, like Kamara is a very, very tempting player, etc. And if you can find some of these other players that we talked about that match in, and you can get your salaries all set up, and hopefully some of these low-owned guys will help out. And that's the trick is to get your high-value guys to do what they're supposed to do, and then sneak some low-level players that actually overperform, and then you're making money. Well, that sounds great. Good luck with everybody this week, and good luck, Brady. Hopefully we'll win some more money this week.
Yep. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.